like us, growing in years, with a goal to make a change of the world around your race. They've been able to set the pace.
Welcome to another thrilling episode as we engage another icon on your favourite programme, Youth Engage. Our guest today has been called the grandfather of African geography, and he is a gem of a scholar of great note. Beyond this, he is also an exceptionally good man and an extraordinary patriot. He is none other than Professor Akinlawon Ladipo Mabogunje. Born on the 18th of October 1931 to Pa Joseph Omotunde Mabogunje, a retired UAC official, and Madam Janet Adeola Mabogunje, a trader. Young Mabogunje had his elementary education at the Holy Trinity School and the United Native African Church School in Kano from 1935 to 1941, and Central School Mapo, Ibadan in 1942. His secondary education was at the famous Ibadan Grammar School from 1943 to 1948. His university education began in 1949 at the then University College, Ibadan, where he earned a BA in Geography in 1953. Professor Mabogunje then proceeded to the University of London, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1956, a Master's along with a PhD, all in Geography in 1958 and 1961 respectively. Professor Mabogunje, ALM, started his professional career as a lecturer at the University of Ibadan in 1958. He became a senior lecturer in 1964 and a professor of geography the following year. Thus, at the tender age of 34 and within 7 years of joining the university staff, he had reached the highest level of his profession. This is a record which still stands not only in the Department of Geography at the university, but indeed anywhere on the African continent in the social sciences. Professor Mabogunje has served as a visiting professor to around a dozen prestigious universities all over the world, among which are the universities of Cambridge, Oxford and London, along with Northwestern University in the United States, McGill University in Canada, and as a visiting scholar to the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Professor Mabogunje has aptly demonstrated his administrative expertise and competence in many spheres at university, national and international levels. At the national level, he has served in various capacities, both in the public and private sectors of the Nigerian economy. At international level, he has held many important positions, either as a member, chairman or president of about a dozen organisations. He has received a plethora of honours in various academic, professional and administrative fields, both nationally and internationally. Married to Justice Titi and blessed with children and grandchildren, we present one of the fathers of the social sciences in Nigeria, a true icon for the youth, Professor Akinlawon Mabogunje. Welcome to Youth Engage.
So, of all disciplines to major in, why did you pick geography?
Frankly, I don't know the answer. It was as if geography picked me. I would say that in my class 3, when we started to study the planetary system, somehow it was a revelation how the Earth functions. And from that point on, a lot of things global became easy for me to understand. And the ocean currents, the wind system, the movement of the sun, the rotation of the earth, human usage of the land, what we will now call environmental impact of human beings, all those became relatively easy for me to handle, that even at that, in class 3, I was just 14, 15, I was having to teach my seniors to help them understand what seemed to me so obvious. So by the time I had to choose what subjects to, in those days we didn't do JAM. We really did an entrance exam of 6 subjects, as if you're doing school start again. So I had to choose subjects which I was sure about. I must say at one stage, I was tempted to think I would go into medicine. But that was because in secondary school those days, we didn't have real science education very strong. My school didn't have a good science laboratory. So at the end of class 3, we were always asked, do you want to go to the Latin class or the science? Now, the more, I will say brilliant students usually opt for Latin. And so I was in the Latin class, but we now insisted that although we couldn't do science, at least we could do biology, even though we didn't have laboratory. And so many of us in that class, one of my classmates being late Chief Bola, we were all in the Latin class, but we were allowed to do biology, not with experiment actually physically done, but reading it in the book. And so what was always interesting was that even though we didn't do the practical as such, we always came first, second in the exam as against those who did the science. So it was that made me think I could do physics and chemistry like that. But they were not that type of subject. And so when I had to do the entrance exam, I could have done, I did biology as one of my 6 subjects, but I dare not put my chemistry or physics because they were very rudimentary. So I went back to those subjects I was sure. But from that point on, as I said, in the school, from class 4, I think I was winning all the prizes in geography. When I got to University College, I was also winning the prizes in geography. When I got to University College London, I was also winning the prizes in geography. So I can't explain why. The only thing I would say is that, we all have different talents. And some people can think in 3 dimensions. But some can't. Invariably when you're doing things like contour, what we call contour, how to produce a map showing hills and valleys and so on. Now, some people can't read it. Some can read it. I think I have a special grip in the sense that I can always think of things as if they were on the face of the earth.
Sir, what would you say was your turning point, your breaking point, a moment you'll never forget that led you to be the man you are today?
I would like to say it could be just that you're lucky you were given an opportunity, note what I said, and you grasp it with both hands. You see, when I tell my history, I could show that for the last 50 years, from 1961, there was no year I wasn't serving government. Not as a lecturer, that they come to me and say, help us. And you might say, therefore, the turning point was 1961. When the chief statistician of Western Nigeria came and said, you're going to help us prepare for the census. And from 1961 to 2011, there was no single year I wasn't being asked to do something out of my normal job for one government or the other. In 1966, we had the military coup. And out of the blues, I was asked to see the governor, the military governor of the West, Adekunle Fajuyi. And I went to see him. And I was surprised. He was telling me, look, there's been a lot of problem with the forest reserve of the Western region. And he wants to constitute a government, a committee, to look into the problem. Because before he came, the political government at that time was giving license to people to gain their support, and they were cutting into the forest in areas they shouldn't have gone to. And so he asked me, and when they gave me the terms of reference, it was not only to look into this, but then to advise government what to do. Okay, so we started that investigation, and in the process of advising government what to do, it became clear that for the forest we have in this part of the country, we're not using it. The colonial government was happy to cut our trees and take it away, or take them away. But we can't take that attitude. So my committee started looking at what should we do about making the forest more useful for our own development. My secretary was the deputy conservator of forest. And as we went into this whole thing, that to do so, these forest reserves were already there. They were government owned. They didn't have to buy it. But they were allowing it to be occupied only by the tropical hardwoods. And those need a lot of acres. And yet, if we could bring in some exotic trees, like teak, like melina, we could grow trees that we could use to make paper, to make boards, to do all sorts of things, plywood. And we were doing all of this, calculating what this would mean in our report. When people ask me to advise them, my job is to give them the best advice I can think of. It's not to anticipate whether they will accept the advice or not. If they accept it, good. But I would have discharged my function. So if you ask me, from that first, even the census, and I could talk about that, it was to make sure that whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. And I can complete that story, because what then happened when we submitted our report, in the meantime, Adekunle Fajuyi, as the military governor, had been killed. The governor that followed him was Adebayo. Major, he was brigadier then. And he constituted his government. By the time we submitted our report, there was he hadn't appointed his ministers. But once the report came, some months after, he appointed his minister. And the minister he sent to the Ministry of Agriculture and Natural Resources was again the late Chief Bola. Now, without reference to me, Bola found our report the only challenging and innovative thing in that ministry. And he carried out every one of our recommendations. All I'm trying to say is that if you take the view that any job anybody gives you, you do it to the best of your ability, you'll be surprised how many of them come to be accepted and respected. And I can tell that's the story of my life. That is why over 50 years, I could talk about what I did in the census, what I did in Kainji, what I did with forestry, what I did with the Federal Capital Territory, what I did. I mean, it could go on. But in each case, the underlying principle is that you must give of your best.
As a geographer,
Yes.
what would be your solution to the erection of unplanned structures in Nigeria?
Well, I was trying to say we had this problem of the relationship between government and the people. Part of that relationship is still overlain by a colonial attitude of civil servants and the people. And therefore, the type of interaction that requires explanation of why we must have a planned situation somehow gets missing. And so what you get is demolition. Whereas in fact, if you've told us why you need to put a road through here, that if we don't do it, our refuse cannot be collected. If we have fire, they can't come in there. A lot of things can't happen. You will get the people themselves, what we will call participatory governance, making it easy to plan. Now, but remember, a lot of our problems still derives from the corruption that makes people want to exercise power in situations where what they needed was counseling. What do I mean? That you ask a person to be a town planner, you now go to register something. Somebody is hitting your file, somebody is doing, they just make life so difficult that your reaction is to ignore government. And there's a lot of ignoring government. In the reason why the question you ask is there, that instead of making it easy for all of us to do what government wants us to do, the tendency is for government to make it so hard that we will rather default. Okay, we'll have to change that. The military period, of course, made that a little more difficult. But as we get back into civilian governance, we will start appreciating that the whole purpose of government is the improvement of the living condition of the people.
Thank you, sir.
Good.
Sir,
Yeah.
as a planner,
Yeah.
can you kindly tell us, is Nigeria well planned by your generation like other advanced countries for us to inherit?
Look at this part of the country, the western part. We had always, our grandfather, have always tended to live in what we call urban settlement, compact and large. Now, depending on the circumstance those places grew up, they had plans or they had no plans. If you went to Ijebu-Ode or Ife or Ilesha, you will see what we call a rectilinear pattern of roads. If you came to Ibadan or Abeokuta, it's all hickledy-pickledy because they developed under war conditions. But since then, we've trained planners, but they seem more concerned with layouts, new layouts, than with the old city. It's only now we haven't government talking about urban renewal. Remember, in Nigeria, we've had like 11 years of civilian rule. We had 6 years before, between 1960 and 1966. We had 4 of Shagari, and we've only started since 1999. So there's still a lot to be done, and the expectation is that as your generation read about planning, as you go abroad and see how other places develop, you would come back and plan. That's why I was involved in the planning of Abuja. It's meant to show you what a planned city can be like. But there are still many things we're not doing right in Abuja. But you saw Lagos, part of it is planned, part is not planned, depending on where you are. So, but it's one thing I would hope your generation would pay a lot more attention to.
Thank you, sir.
Good.
Who are your role models?
You know, the question of role model are really things that are very important in the critical period of between 15 and maybe 30. At that time, our role model were people like Chief Obafemi Awolowo. Why? Because they were holding out to us how a patriotic person can live his life, disciplined, self-disciplined, honest, with integrity, hard work, and so on. And so a lot of us in those days, if you saw my picture at a young man of 20, we would put on our cap. We would, okay, at that time, you know, now we wear agbada with glee. But at that time, it was regarded as native. Only rural people wear agbada and so on. We all had to dress like the colonial chap. Okay, but the Awolowo people broke that and said, agbada, that's our own, and we can have 3-piece suit of a buba shokoto, and we would all go that way. We would abhor alcohol, again, because we know people in his generation, they are leaders. Because really role models means you trying to put yourself like a leader. And that meant any leader worth being a role model must fulfill, if you like, I would say 4 basic things. He must have integrity, you know. That means he's honest, he's truthful, okay. He must be diligent. He must work hard. Okay. And he must have a modest lifestyle. When we were in school, our principal used to tell us something like, okay, I don't know whether you all speak Yoruba, but we went to, and he will say, Tete jaye, koma ba jekwe. Ma tete jaye, ko ba le jekwe. Do you know what that means? Okay. Don't try to enjoy life too early, because then it won't last. So all these young men trying to make money too early, you know, what would you do with money as a young man?
Comparing the youth of today
Yes.
to your youthful life,
Yes.
when you were a youth,
Yes.
what is the difference that is spot? And do you believe in the youth of today? Do you believe they can perform?
Oh, I always believe in the youth. Why? Because if you don't, you're just wasting your time. There would always be the youth. I'll tell you a story. There was some time ago when people were saying, the youth of today, it's the end of the world. Can they do anything? Okay, and then somebody brought out a quotation from the 5th century BC, when somebody was saying exactly that can we leave the world in the hands of the youth? Of course. Who else would we leave it in their hands? The only thing is, you see, two things. Their world is changing. I mean, between when I was a student and today, you just think of the cascade of innovations, of technical development, even all these cameras. Okay, you may be too young, but there was a time all we were doing was typing. Okay, we were posting letters. Then it came, we could fax letters. Then we could email letters. Then we could say SMS. And we could do, but that's your generation. Okay, so in a sense, you're more skilled in certain areas than we are. The one thing one tells the youth is that what we call the eternal verities don't change. What are the verities? Means truth. Now listen to this. I remember this from my Bible. It's in the pastor will. You can go and check it. Philippians chapter 4, maybe 5 and 6. Where Paul was telling them, listen to what he says. Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any praise, if there be any virtue, think on. Now, that was 2,000 years ago, and yet it's still true today. Whatever is true, and all we've been talking is be truthful. Whatever is honest, all we've been saying is be honest. Whatever is just. Okay, those things don't change. But the social context in which they have to operate those things change. And it's that process of change that the youth come in. And when you say you don't believe in the youth, you were a young man once, and the world ended up in your hand as an old man. Are you going to take the world to your grave, or are you going to hand it over to some other generation? But as I said, those guiding principles don't change. That's why we call them eternal verities.